Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Location: Isle Royale National Park, Michigan. Date: October 29th, 2007. The fog came in from Lake Superior like something with intention. Tyler Brandt stood at the dock of Rock Harbor, watching the gray wall advance across the water, swallowing the distant silhouette of the mainland until there was nothing left but white. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since sunrise, and his breath came out in visible plumes that seemed to hang in the still air longer than they should. His fifth day alone on the island. His fifth day as the youngest member of the skeleton crew that maintained Isle Royale through the long winter closure. And already he understood why the senior rangers had looked at him with something like pity when he'd volunteered for the assignment. The island was 45 miles long and 9 miles wide, a wilderness of boreal forest and rocky ridges rising from the largest freshwater lake in the world. No roads connected it to anywhere. The last ferry had departed 3 days ago, carrying the final tourists of the season back to Copper Harbor on the Michigan mainland. The seaplane wouldn't return until spring unless there was an emergency, and the radio tower on Mount Ojibwe was the only reliable connection to the outside world. Tyler had wanted isolation. He had wanted to prove himself capable of handling a remote posting, to show the district supervisor that a 23-year-old rookie could be trusted with real responsibility. Now, watching the fog erase the world beyond the harbor, he wondered if he had understood what isolation actually meant. His morning routine had become ritual in less than a week. Coffee from the ancient percolator in the ranger station, weather check on the shortwave, inspection of the dock and the 2 boats that remained in winter storage. The other rangers, Karen at the Wendigo station on the island's western end, and old Marcus, who lived year-round in a cabin near Siskiwit Lake, checked in twice daily, their voices crackling through the static like transmissions from another planet. Today's weather report had warned of the approaching fog bank, advising limited movement until visibility improved. Tyler had logged the warning, finished his coffee, and was preparing to hunker down with paperwork when the radio crackled to life with something other than scheduled check-ins. Rock Harbor, this is Wendigo. Karen here. You getting this? Tyler grabbed the handset. Wendigo, Rock Harbor. I copy. What's up? Got a situation? Hiker came into my station about 20 minutes ago. Female, mid-20s, says she got separated from her group yesterday and spent the night in the backcountry. She's disoriented, maybe hypothermic. I'm going to keep her here for observation, but Tyler... Karen's voice hesitated, which was unusual. Karen Chen was a 15-year veteran who had seen everything the island could throw at a person. There's something off about her story. Off how? She keeps asking what year it is, and when I told her, she started crying. Tyler felt the first cold finger of unease trace down his spine. What do you mean, what year? Like she hit her head? Maybe, but she's got a park permit in her pack. Valid permit, proper signatures, everything in order. Another pause. Tyler, the permit is dated October 2019. Static filled the channel. Tyler stared at the handset, certain he had misheard. Say again, Wendigo. Did you say 2019? Affirmative. October 15th, 2019. 12 years from now. I've got the permit right here in my hand, and I'm looking at a date that doesn't exist yet. Karen's voice had taken on a quality Tyler had never heard from her before. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. I'm going to send you a description of the hiker and her gear. I want you to check the emergency logs, see if anything matches. And Tyler, stay close to your radio. Something's wrong here. Something's really wrong. And Hannah Reeves had known something was wrong the moment the trail disappeared. She had been hiking the Greenstone Ridge, the spine of rock that ran the length of Isle Royale, following the familiar path she had walked twice before in previous summers. The October light was different from what she remembered, sharper, more golden, the birch trees blazing yellow against the dark green of the spruce. But the trail itself should have been the same, 35 miles of well-maintained path connecting one end of the island to the other, marked with cairns and signs at every junction. Impossible to lose. And yet, the junction at Lake Dezor should have appeared 2 miles back. She had been watching for it, checking her map, counting the landmarks. The distinctive split boulder was where it should be. The view of the lake to the south matched her memory exactly, but where the trail should have branched north toward Hatchet Lake, there was nothing. Just unbroken forest, dense spruce and fir pressing close on both sides, as if the path had never existed. Hannah stopped, pulled out her GPS unit, and waited for it to acquire satellites. The screen flickered, showed her position, and then displayed coordinates that made no sense. According to the device, she was standing in the middle of Lake Superior, 3 miles from the island's shore. She turned the unit off and on again. Same result. She checked her compass. The needle spun lazily, unable to find north, as if the magnetic field itself had become confused. The silence was what frightened her most. Isle Royale was never truly quiet. There were always birds, the rustle of small animals, the distant sound of waves against rock. But standing at the junction that didn't exist, holding equipment that couldn't find reality, Hannah heard nothing at all. The wind had stopped. The birds had stopped. Even her own heartbeat seemed muffled, as if the sound couldn't quite reach her ears. She became aware, gradually, that the light was wrong. Not wrong in any way she could easily describe. Just wrong. The shadows fell at angles that didn't match the sun's position. The golden afternoon light seemed to flicker at the edges of her vision, as if she were watching a film with frames missing. And when she looked directly at the trees ahead of her, she could have sworn they were closer than they had been a moment ago. Not moving. Nothing so obvious as that. Just closer. As if space itself were quietly, patiently, compressing around her. Hannah began to walk back the way she had come. The trail was still there behind her. She could see her own boot prints in the muddy sections, proof that she had passed this way. She focused on those prints, following them like breadcrumbs, refusing to look at the trees that seemed to lean inward with every step, refusing to acknowledge the way the silence had begun to feel like something listening. She walked for an hour, then 2. The trail never changed. The same landmarks appeared and reappeared, the split boulder, the view of the lake, the distinctive twisted pine that had been struck by lightning sometime in the distant past. She passed them once, twice, 3 times, always walking forward, never turning back, and yet somehow circling through the same quarter-mile of trail like a needle stuck in a groove. On the 4th pass, the woman appeared. She was standing beside the split boulder, a hiker dressed in gear that looked subtly different from anything Hannah recognized. Older styles, maybe, or brands she didn't know. The woman was staring at Hannah with an expression of absolute terror, mouth open as if to scream, eyes wide and wet with tears. "Help me," the woman said. "Please. I've been walking for 3 days. The trail won't let me leave." Hannah opened her mouth to respond, and the woman flickered like a television losing signal and was gone. The split boulder stood alone, exactly as it had always been, but now, carved into its surface in letters that looked decades old, were 2 words that hadn't been there before. Still here. Tyler spent 2 hours searching the emergency logs, the incident reports, the records of every missing person case Isle Royale had seen in the past 50 years. He found nothing that matched Karen's description of the hiker at Wendigo. Female, mid-20s, dark hair, green jacket, hiking boots with a distinctive red stripe. Nothing about a Hannah Reeves from Duluth, Minnesota, which was the name on the impossible permit. But he found other things. A report from 1987. 2 hikers on the Greenstone Ridge reported seeing a woman in old-fashioned clothes who asked them what year it was, then walked into the trees and didn't come out the other side. A note from 1963. A ranger discovered a campsite near Lake Dezor that contained equipment of unfamiliar manufacture, including a water bottle made of a material he couldn't identify. And oldest of all, a handwritten entry from 1943, when Isle Royale was still under the jurisdiction of the Michigan Department of Conservation. 3rd report this season of hikers encountering displaced persons. Recommend investigation of Lake Desor area. Something is wrong with time on this island. Tyler stared at that last entry for a long time. Something is wrong with time. He thought about Karen's voice on the radio, the fear she hadn't quite been able to hide. He thought about the fog outside, which had thickened until he couldn't see the end of the dock from the station window. He thought about Hannah Reeves, sitting in the Wendigo station with a permit from a year that didn't exist yet, asking what year it was and crying when she heard the answer. He keyed the radio. "Wendigo, this is Rock Harbor. Karen, you copy?" Static. A long hiss of white noise that seemed to pulse and breathe. "Karen, this is Tyler. Respond, please." The static shifted, resolved into something that might have been a voice. Faint, impossibly distant, as if coming from very far away, or very long ago. Tyler pressed the handset against his ear, straining to hear. "Still here." The voice was female, but not Karen's. Younger, rougher with fear. "3 days. The trail won't let me. Please, I'm still here." The transmission cut out. When Tyler tried again, there was nothing but silence on the channel. He tried the emergency frequency, the backup channel, the direct line to the mainland. Nothing. The fog pressed against the windows like something trying to get in, and Tyler Brandt sat alone in the Rock Harbor station, listening to the absence of sound, understanding for the first time that he was trapped on an island with something that didn't obey the rules of reality. The woman came back on the 7th pass. Hannah had stopped counting after the 5th loop through the same stretch of trail. She had stopped trying to use her GPS, her compass, her map. She had even stopped looking at the trees that pressed closer with each circuit, the shadows that fell wrong, the light that flickered at the edges of everything. She simply walked, putting one foot in front of the other, because stopping felt worse. The woman was sitting on the split boulder this time, her legs dangling over the edge like a child on a swing. She looked older than before. The same face, the same terrified eyes, but lined now with years that hadn't been there an hour ago. Gray streaked her hair. Her hands folded in her lap were spotted with age. "You're new," the woman said. Her voice was rusty, as if she hadn't spoken in a very long time. "I remember being new. I remember thinking I could find the way out." Hannah stopped walking. She was too tired for fear now, too exhausted for anything but a dull, distant curiosity. "How long have you been here?" "I don't know anymore. The light changes, but it never gets dark. I've counted 1,000 sunsets that never finish setting." The woman looked at Hannah with something like pity. "I've seen others come through. Some of them find the thin place before it closes. They walk out and it's a different year. But at least they walk out. The rest of us..." She gestured at the trees, at the looping trail, at the endless gray sky. "The rest of us stay." "The thin place," Hannah repeated. "What does that mean?" The Ojibwe knew about this island before anyone else. They didn't come here often. Said it was a spirit road, a place where the path between worlds wore thin. The woman smiled, and it was the saddest smile Hannah had ever seen. "Sometimes the road opens. Sometimes you can slip through, go back to where time still works. But you have to find it while you're still attached, while you still remember what year you came from, what day it was, who you were." Her eyes focused on something Hannah couldn't see. "I don't remember anymore. I've been here so long I've forgotten what I was trying to get back to." The woman flickered again, that same television static shimmer, and for a moment Hannah saw her as she had been, young, frightened, still believing she could escape. Then the image stabilized and the old woman remained, sitting on her boulder waiting for a sunset that would never quite arrive. "The fog," the woman said. "When the fog comes in from the lake, the thin place is open. If you're going to find your way back, it has to be now." She pointed toward the west, toward a gap in the trees that Hannah was certain hadn't been there before. "That way. Walk until you can't see the trail anymore, and then keep walking. Don't look back, don't stop. And whatever you do, don't let it convince you that you've already left." "Let what convince me?" But the woman was gone. Only the carved words remained. Still here, and now beneath them, fresh cuts in the rock, as if made moments ago. Run. Tyler found the thin place at 4:47 p.m. He had left the Rock Harbor station against every protocol, every instinct, every piece of training he had received. But the radio was dead. The fog had reduced visibility to inches, and somewhere out there, in a future that hadn't happened yet, or a past that had already closed, a woman named Hannah Reeves was trapped in a loop she couldn't escape. He followed the trail toward Lake Desor, because the old records all mentioned Lake Desor, because something in those yellowed pages suggested that the lake was the center, the source, the place where time grew thinnest. The fog swallowed everything, the trees, the path, his own hands in front of his face. He walked by feel, by the texture of the ground beneath his boots, by something deeper that might have been instinct or might have been madness. The coordinates on his GPS made no sense. His compass spun uselessly. His watch had stopped at 4:47 and refused to move again, but he kept walking, because somewhere ahead of him he could hear something, a voice, faint and female, calling for help in a year that didn't belong here. He found her at the split boulder. She was young, mid-20s, dark hair, green jacket, boots with a red stripe. She was sitting on the ground with her back against the rock, her face pale, her eyes unfocused, her lips moving in words he couldn't quite hear. Behind her, carved into the stone, words that shouldn't exist, still here. Run. Hannah? Tyler knelt beside her, touched her shoulder. Her skin was ice cold. Hannah Reeves? I'm Tyler Brandt, park ranger. I'm here to help you. Her eyes focused on him slowly, as if she were looking up from the bottom of a very deep well. What year is it? 2007, October 29th, 2007. She started to cry. I was supposed to be here in 2019. I was supposed to be hiking with my daughter. She's 8 years old.
Hannah's voice broke. She won't be born for another 6 years. I left her. I left her in a year that doesn't exist for me anymore. Tyler didn't understand. He couldn't understand. The scale of what she was saying was too vast, too wrong, too far outside the boundaries of any reality he had ever known. But he understood the fog pressing close around them, the way the light seemed to flicker and skip, the feeling of something vast and patient watching from the spaces between moments. We need to move, he said. Can you walk? It doesn't matter. Hannah's voice was flat, drained of hope. I've been walking for days. The trail loops back. It always loops back. The only way out is through the thin place, and I can't find it. I can't. I'll find it. Tyler pulled her to her feet, steadied her when she swayed. The fog opened a path. That's what the records say. When the fog comes in, the thin place is open. We just have to keep moving until we find the other side. They walked together into the white nothing. Tyler counted his steps, anchored himself to that simple rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. The fog was absolute, a blank page where reality should have been. He could feel Hannah's weight against his shoulder, could hear her breathing, could smell the cold metal scent of Lake Superior somewhere impossibly close. He held on to these sensations like a lifeline, refused to let go, refused to look at the shapes that sometimes moved at the edge of the whiteness, figures that might have been hikers, might have been ghosts, might have been other versions of themselves lost in other loops of the same endless trail. At step 743, the fog thinned. Light appeared ahead, real light, golden afternoon light that fell at the correct angle, that cast shadows in the right direction. Tyler stumbled toward it, dragging Hannah with him. And then they were through. They were standing on solid ground at the Lake Desor junction, and the trail stretched ahead of them exactly as it should be, exactly as the maps said it was, leading back toward civilization and sanity and time that flowed in only one direction. Hannah collapsed against him, sobbing. Tyler held her upright and stared at the sun, confirming its position, confirming reality. His watch had started again. 4:52 p.m. 5 minutes.
They had walked through whatever that was for 5 minutes, though it had felt like hours, like days, like years. Behind them, the fog remained, a wall of white at the edge of the trail. And in the fog, just for a moment, Tyler saw a figure standing motionless, a woman old and gray, watching them with eyes that held 12 years of trapped forever. Then the fog closed, and she was gone. Karen found them at the Wendigo station just before dark. Hannah was suffering from severe hypothermia, dehydration, and what the mainland hospital would later describe as acute psychological distress of unknown origin. She was evacuated by emergency seaplane the following morning, and Tyler never saw her again. The official report listed her as a lost hiker rescued from the Lake Dizor area after becoming disoriented in heavy fog. The permit with the impossible date was never mentioned. The carved words on the split boulder were attributed to vandalism by unknown parties. Tyler Brandt finished the winter season at Isle Royale. He told himself it was because quitting would look bad on his record, would confirm every doubt his supervisors had about giving a rookie such a remote assignment. He told himself he wasn't afraid, that what he had seen in the fog was explainable, that time didn't slip, and trail didn't loop, and women didn't walk out of years that hadn't happened yet. But sometimes, on the days when the fog rolled in from Lake Superior, Tyler found himself checking his watch more often than necessary, counting the minutes, making sure they still moved forward. And sometimes, late at night, he thought about the old woman on the split boulder, the one who had been young once, the one who had forgotten what year she came from. He thought about how she had said some people find the thin place before it closes, and the rest of them stay. He thought about Hannah Reeves somewhere in the future, hiking with a daughter she hadn't yet given birth to, walking a trail that Tyler had already walked 12 years before she arrived. He thought about the words carved in stone, still here. And he wondered, with a chill that had nothing to do with the October cold, how many versions of himself might be walking that looped trail right now, counting steps that never ended, waiting for a fog that never lifted, carved into the rock of an island that remembered every moment that had ever happened, and every moment that never would. Location: North Cascades National Park, Washington. Date: September 28, 2013. The rain had been falling for 6 days when Ryan Caldwell first heard his own voice coming through the radio. He had grown accustomed to the rain by then, the way it wrapped around Desolation Peak like a living thing, turning the world beyond his windows into a gray blur of shifting water and half-seen trees. The fire lookout tower stood at 6,200 feet, above the tree line in summer but swallowed by clouds in autumn. And from late September onward, the mountain existed in a perpetual state of drowning. Ryan had signed on for the solitude, 3 months alone, watching for fires that never came in a forest too wet to burn. The Park Service called it maintaining presence in the backcountry. Ryan called it exactly what he needed: silence, distance, time to think without the noise of the world below. The tower itself was a 14 by 14-foot cabin perched on a steel frame, accessible only by a 4-mile trail that switchbacked up through old-growth forest before emerging onto the exposed ridge. Inside, Ryan had everything he needed: a cot, a propane stove, a small table with topographic maps spread across it, shelves of canned food and freeze-dried meals, and the radio, the Motorola base unit that connected him to the ranger station in Marble Mount, 40 miles away and 3,000 feet below. He checked in twice daily, 0800 and 2000, reporting weather conditions and visibility. Most days, those 2 brief exchanges were his only human contact. He had been here since July 1st, 89 days of watching the valleys fill with morning mist and empty again by noon. 89 days of tracking the movement of clouds across peaks whose names he had memorized from the maps: Jack Mountain, Crater Peak, Ruby Mountain, the jagged spine of the Picket Range to the north. He knew the sounds of the tower intimately by now: the creak of the steel frame in wind, the particular rhythm of rain on the metal roof, the skitter of mice in the walls that he had stopped trying to eliminate. He knew the silences too, the way the forest below would go quiet before a storm, the absence of birdsong that preceded the first drops of rain. What he did not know until that morning was the sound of his own voice speaking words he had not yet said. It happened at 0743, 17 minutes before his scheduled check-in. Ryan was heating water for coffee on the propane burner, watching the blue flame and listening to the rain, when the radio crackled to life. "Marble Mount, this is Desolation." His voice, unmistakably his voice with the slight roughness that came from days of not speaking. "Requesting immediate evacuation. There's something wrong up here. I can hear them in the trees." Ryan froze, the kettle suspended in his hand. The transmission continued, his voice growing more strained, more urgent. "I know how this sounds, I know. But Travis was right. He was right about all of it. They've been watching me for weeks and now they're..." Static swallowed the rest of the sentence, then silence. He set down the kettle with hands that weren't quite steady and crossed to the radio. The channel indicator showed his frequency, the dedicated lookout channel, not one of the park's general bands. He picked up the handset. "Marble Mount, this is Desolation. Did you copy that last transmission?" A pause. Then Linda's voice, the morning dispatcher. "Desolation, Marble Mount. Negative on any transmission. You're early. Everything okay up there?" He looked at the radio, at the speaker that had just broadcast his voice saying things he hadn't said. Yeah, everything's fine. Disregard. Just testing the equipment." "Copy. Desolation. Standing by for your 0800 check-in." Ryan set down the handset and stood very still in the center of his small cabin, listening to the rain and the creak of the tower, and his own heartbeat loud in his ears. He had heard his voice. He was certain of it. And the transmission had mentioned Travis. Travis Mendez had been the previous summer's lookout, the man whose job Ryan had taken when the posting came up in the spring hiring cycle. Ryan had never met him. Travis had left the park before Ryan arrived, supposedly transferred to a desk position in Cedro Woolley. But there had been something off about the way the other rangers talked about him, or rather didn't talk about him. A hesitation when his name came up, a tendency to change the subject. Ryan had found Travis's journal 3 weeks into his posting, wedged behind a loose board in the cabin's floor. A spiral notebook filled with increasingly erratic handwriting. At first the entries were mundane. Weather observations, wildlife sightings, complaints about the propane delivery schedule. But by August of the previous year, something had changed. August 15th, heard whistling in the trees again last night. High-pitched, almost like a flute. Asked Marble Mount if there were any other personnel in the area. Negative. No one for miles. August 19th. The whistling is closer now. Sometimes it sounds like it's coming from just below the tower. When I shine my light down, I see nothing, but I can feel them looking back. August 23rd, woke up to my own voice on the radio. A transmission I don't remember making. In it, I was crying, begging them to let me leave. Marble Mount says they received nothing. August 28th. I know what they are now. The Salish people have names for them. Stiaha, Tsiatko, the ones who live in the deep forest, the Stick Indians. They don't kill you. They don't need to. They get inside your head. They make you hear things, see things. They make you doubt everything until you can't tell what's real anymore. I think they've been here for a very long time. August 31st. I'm leaving. I don't care about the job. I don't care about anything except getting off this mountain. If anyone finds this, don't stay. Don't listen to the whistling. And whatever you do, don't answer when you hear your own voice. Ryan had dismissed the journal as the product of isolation-induced paranoia. 3 months alone could do strange things to a person's mind. He had filed it away and tried not to think about it, tried not to notice the way the other rangers avoided mentioning Travis's name. Now, standing in his cabin with the echo of his own voice still ringing in his ears, he pulled the journal from its hiding place and read the final entry again. Don't answer when you hear your own voice. Travis Mendez had known something was wrong by his 3rd week on the mountain. It started with the whistling, high and thin and utterly inhuman, drifting up from the forest below the tower in the hours after midnight. At first he assumed it was wind through the trees, some acoustic trick of the terrain. But wind didn't whistle in patterns. Wind didn't repeat the same 4-note sequence over and over, night after night, like something trying to get his attention. He reported it to Marblemount on August 3rd. Atmospheric anomaly, he called it. The dispatcher, not Linda, Linda worked days, had noted it in the log and moved on. No one seemed concerned. No one offered an explanation. By August 10th, Travis had stopped sleeping through the night. The whistling came closer each evening, and with it came a sensation he couldn't quite name. A feeling of being observed, of eyes on his skin that he couldn't locate. He would stand at the tower's windows for hours, scanning the tree line with his binoculars, searching for any sign of movement. He never saw anything, but the feeling never went away. The first time he heard his own voice was August 23rd, just after 0300. He had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep when the radio woke him. His voice, mid-sentence, speaking words he had no memory of saying. Can't make them stop. Every night they get closer. Every night the whistling is louder. I don't know what they want, but I think they want me to come down. They want me to walk into the trees. Travis grabbed the handset. This is desolation. Who's transmitting on this frequency? Static. Then his own voice again, but different now. Softer, almost gentle. You know who this is, Travis. You know what's happening. You've known for weeks. Come down. Come into the trees. We're waiting for you. He didn't sleep again that night. He sat in the corner farthest from the windows, his back against the wall, watching the darkness beyond the glass and listening to the whistling grow louder, closer, until it seemed to be coming from just outside the door. In the morning, Marblemount confirmed they had received no transmissions from his frequency. The radio log showed nothing between his 2000 check-in and his 0800 report. Whatever he had heard existed only for him. The rain stopped on the 7th day, and Ryan almost wished it hadn't. Without the constant percussion on the roof, the silence of the mountain pressed in. A thick, waiting silence that seemed to absorb sound rather than merely lack it. He could hear his own breathing too loudly, his own footsteps on the wooden floor, the scrape of his chair when he sat at the table to eat meals he no longer had an appetite for. He hadn't heard the transmission again. 5 days since his own voice had come through the radio, speaking about Travis, about them in the trees. He had almost convinced himself it was a fluke, some atmospheric bounce, a stray signal from another frequency, his sleep-deprived mind filling in words that weren't there. Almost. Then he found the recording. The lookout tower had an old cassette recorder, a relic from the 1980s that someone had left in a drawer beneath the radio equipment. Ryan had noticed it his first week but never touched it. He had his phone for music, not that he bothered much anymore. But on the 7th day, in the oppressive silence that followed the rain, he opened the drawer and saw that a tape was already loaded. He pressed play. His own voice filled the cabin. Day 92. They're getting bolder now. I can see them sometimes at the edge of the tree line, just standing there. They look like people at first, but the proportions are wrong. Too thin, too tall, and they don't move right. They kind of shift like they're not quite solid. Ryan's throat went dry. He checked the date on his watch. September 28th. Day 89 of his posting. The recording continued. I've stopped doing the radio check-ins. There's no point. Whatever I say, Marblemount hears something different. I told them I was fine this morning. Linda said I was screaming. She said I was begging for help, saying there was someone in the tower with me. A long pause. Maybe there is. I can't always tell anymore. I'll be sitting here alone and then I'll look up and there's a reflection in the window that doesn't match my movements. Or I'll hear footsteps on the stairs, but when I check, there's no one there. Except there is. There's always someone there. I just can't see them until they want me to. Another pause. When the voice resumed, it was barely above a whisper. Travis tried to warn me. He wrote it all down, left the journal where he knew someone would find it. But I didn't listen. I thought he was crazy. I thought 3 months alone had broken him. And maybe it did. Maybe that's what they do. They break you piece by piece until you can't tell what's you and what's them. Until you walk into the trees because it seems like the only way to make it stop. A sound in the background of the recording. A high, thin whistle. 4 notes repeating. They're here now. I can see them at the window. 3 of them just standing on the observation deck looking in. They look like me. They all look like me. The recording ended. Ryan sat motionless, the recorder clutched in his hands, staring at the window across the cabin, at his own reflection staring back. The reflection smiled. Ryan didn't. He called Marble Mount at Oro 900, an hour after his scheduled check-in. Desolation, this is Marble Mount. Ryan, we've been trying to reach you. Is everything okay? What do you mean? His voice came out strange, distant, like he was listening to someone else speak. I checked in at 0800, standard report, fog lifting, visibility improving. A pause. Negative, desolation. We received no transmission at 0800. We've been calling you for an hour. Linda was about to send a search team up. Ryan looked at the radio log in front of him, the handwritten entries he made after each transmission. The 800 slot was filled in, his handwriting recording a check-in he had no memory of making. I'm here. I'm fine. Must have been equipment malfunction. Copy, desolation. Another pause, longer this time. Ryan, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Have you been hearing anything unusual up there? Sounds that don't have a source? The whistling had started again last night. He hadn't written it in the log. No, nothing unusual. Everything's fine. Okay, just check your batteries, check your antenna, make sure everything's working. And Ryan, take care of yourself up there. We're coming to close out the station in 5 days. End of season. You'll be off that mountain soon. 5 days. Ryan set down the handset and looked at the window. The fog had lifted as his phantom check-in had apparently reported, and for the first time in a week, he could see the tree line below the tower. The ancient Douglas firs and western red cedars, their branches heavy with moisture, their shadows pooling beneath them like dark water. Standing at the edge of the forest where the trees met the alpine meadow, 3 figures watched the tower. They were too thin, too tall. They stood perfectly motionless, their shapes almost blending with the tree trunks behind them, and Ryan couldn't tell if they had faces because the fog still clung to the lower elevations, softening edges, blurring details, but he knew they were looking at him. He knew they had been looking at him for weeks. He reached for Travis's journal and opened it to the last entry, the one he had read a dozen times now. They don't kill you. They don't need to. They get inside your head. They make you hear things, see things. They make you doubt everything until you can't tell what's real anymore. Ryan looked at the window, at the figures by the tree line, at his own reflection, which was still smiling even though his face wasn't, which was mouthing words he couldn't hear through the glass. And from the radio, his own voice began to speak. Day 94. I'm going down today. I can hear them calling, and it's beautiful. It's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. Travis was wrong. He was wrong about everything. They don't want to hurt us. They just want us to come home. Ryan watched himself stand, watched himself walk toward the door of the tower. His body was moving without his permission, his hand reaching for the latch, and somewhere in the back of his mind, the last part of him that was still Ryan, still separate, he was screaming. The door opened. The cold mountain air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine and something else beneath it, something old and patient and vast. The whistling rose from the trees, 4 notes repeating, welcoming him. Ryan Caldwell stepped out onto the observation deck. Below him at the edge of the forest, the figures raised their 2 long arms in greeting. His reflection stayed behind, watching from the window, still smiling. The search team found the tower empty on October 3rd. Ryan's gear was still there, his pack, his clothes, his radio still functional, his log entries stopping abruptly on September 28th. The cassette recorder was found in the center of the floor, the tape removed. It was never recovered. The official report listed Ryan Caldwell as a missing person, presumed lost in the wilderness. The terrain around Desolation Peak was notoriously difficult. People vanished in the North Cascades every year, and the park's 700,000 acres held more secrets than any search team could uncover. A ranger named Mendez, Travis Mendez, working a desk job in Cedro Woolley, requested the file but was denied. His own disappearance and subsequent recovery were still being investigated. He had been found in November of the previous year, walking along Highway 20 with no memory of the preceding 3 months. He couldn't explain where he had been. He couldn't explain the scars on his arms, thin, parallel lines like something had held him in place with too many fingers. He couldn't explain why sometimes he still heard whistling in his sleep. He couldn't explain why on certain nights he would wake to find his own voice coming from the phone on his nightstand, leaving voicemails he had no memory of recording. "Come back to the mountain, Travis. We're still here. We're still waiting. Come home." The lookout position at Desolation Peak was quietly discontinued the following spring. "Budget cuts," the official statement said. "The tower still stands. The radio still works if you know the frequency. Some nights, if the atmospheric conditions are right, transmissions come through from the mountain. A man's voice, calm and steady, reporting weather conditions and visibility. The voice identifies itself as Desolation Station. No one has been posted to Desolation Station in 11 years. The transmissions continue anyway. And in the deep forest below the peak, in places where no trails exist and no hikers venture, something still whistles in the darkness." 4 notes. Repeating, waiting for the next one to listen. Location: Wind Cave National Park, South Dakota. Date: October 9th, 2011. And the cave breathed out that morning, a steady exhalation of 53-degree air that fogged against the October cold and made the entrance look like the mouth of something sleeping. Madison Herrera stood at the natural opening, a hole in the earth barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and watched the mist curl upward into the pale autumn sky. She'd worked at Wind Cave for 6 years, had made the descent hundreds of times, and still this moment gave her pause. The Lakota called it Maka Onie, the breathing earth. They believed the cave was where humanity first emerged into the world, climbing up from darkness into light. What they didn't talk about, except in stories told only to those who needed to hear them, was what had stayed behind. The morning had begun like any other October Sunday. Madison arrived at the visitor center at 7 a.m., before the public tour started, to review the day's permit schedule. Only one group on the books, a team of 4 experienced cavers from the Colorado Grotto, here to survey a newly discovered passage in the lakes region, approximately 3 miles from the natural entrance. They'd submitted their credentials weeks in advance. Combined experience of over 60 years underground, proper equipment, emergency protocols memorized, the kind of group that didn't need babysitting. She'd met them in the parking lot at 8:30. Trevor Ashworth, the team leader, was a geology professor from Boulder, with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent decades mapping the unmappable. His team consisted of his graduate student, a surveyor named Chen, and Chen's wife, also a surveyor. They joked about the weather, complained about the early start, asked Madison the usual questions about the cave's history. She'd given them the usual answers. 154 miles of mapped passages, estimated to be only 5 to 10% of the total system, 3rd longest cave in the world. What she didn't tell them was that some of those mapped passages had been removed from the official surveys. Erased. Marked in the old ranger logs with a single phrase that no one had ever explained to her satisfaction. Do not return. The descent took 40 minutes. Madison led the group through the concrete-lined entrance tunnel, past the elevator shaft that serviced the tourist routes, and into the wild cave beyond. Here the walls were raw limestone, carved by water over millions of years into shapes that looked almost organic. Ribs and vertebrae, frozen waterfalls of flowstone, passages that branched and merged and doubled back on themselves in patterns that defied easy mapping. The air was still, heavy with the mineral smell of ancient rock. Their headlamps carved tunnels of light through darkness so complete it felt like a physical presence. Beautiful, Trevor said, his voice hushed with the particular reverence that caves inspired in those who understood them. How far to the new passage? About 2.5 miles from here. We'll follow the main corridor to the junction room, then take the southern branch toward the lakes. The new passage is off a side tunnel that wasn't on the surveys until last spring's expedition. What made them find it? Madison paused. The truth was complicated. A ranger had heard something during a routine inspection, a sound like knocking from behind a wall that shouldn't have had anything behind it. When they'd investigated, they'd found a narrow crack that opened into a passage no one had ever documented. The passage went back at least a quarter-mile before the survey team had turned around, not because of any physical obstacle, but because of a feeling. A wrongness they couldn't articulate. Madison had read the report. The lead surveyor, a woman with 30 years of experience, had written simply, "Something doesn't want us here." "Airflow," Madison said instead. They noticed a draft coming from what looked like solid rock. Turned out there was a passage behind it. They continued in silence, the only sounds their footsteps and the occasional drip of water from unseen formations. Madison found herself listening for something else, the faint tapping that rangers sometimes reported in this section of the cave. Most attributed it to thermal expansion, rock settling, the natural sounds of a living geological system. But the old reports, the ones from the 1890s when the cave was first being explored, told different stories. The miners who'd come looking for gold had heard the knocking too. They'd called them Tommy knockers after the spirits from the Welsh and Cornish mines they'd left behind. Friendly, the stories said. Warning spirits who knocked to alert you to cave-ins. But some of the miners had gone deeper than anyone else. And some of them had never come back. And the ones who did come back talked about a different kind of knocking. Not warnings, but invitations. Something calling them further in, further down, into passages that led to places that shouldn't exist. Madison shook off the thought. 6 years underground had taught her that darkness played tricks on the mind, that silence became a canvas for the imagination to paint its fears upon. There was nothing in this cave but rock and water and the slow, patient work of time. They reached the junction room an hour into the descent. Here 5 passages converged in a chamber the size of a small cathedral, its ceiling lost in shadows that even their combined lights couldn't penetrate. Madison called for a rest break, and the team settled onto boulders to check their equipment and drink water. "Radio check," she said, keying her handset. "Base, this is Survey Team Alpha, position junction room, all members present and accounted for. Proceeding to target area. Over." The response came scratchy but clear. They were at the outer edge of reliable communication range, but still connected to the surface. "Copy that, Alpha. Weather topside is holding. Expected duration? Over. Estimate 4 to 5 hours for survey work plus return transit. Should be back by 1600. Over." "Understood. Base out." Trevor was studying the passage entrances, his headlamp sweeping across the options like a searchlight. "Southern branch, you said?" "Third from the left. It's marked with a yellow blaze about 20 feet in." He nodded and stood, adjusting his pack. "All right, team. Let's see what's down there." The southern branch was narrower than the main corridor, forcing them to walk single file. The walls pressed close, limestone slick with moisture, the air growing noticeably colder as they descended. Madison had made this transit perhaps a dozen times, but something felt different today. The silence was thicker, more textured, and underneath it, at the very edge of hearing, she thought she detected a sound, rhythmic, faint, like someone tapping on stone very far away. She stopped. "Did anyone hear that?" The team paused, headlamps swinging to face her. Trevor cocked his head, listening. "Hear what?" Silence. Complete and absolute. Not even the drip of water. "Nothing," Madison said. "Never mind. Cave acoustics." They continued. Trevor Ashworth had been in caves on 4 continents, had mapped passages that no human had ever seen, had published papers on formations that challenged existing theories of speleogenesis. He was not a man given to superstition or fancy, but as they approached the new passage, he felt something he hadn't experienced since his first descent as a teenager, a primal unease, a sense that he was being watched by something that existed outside the comfortable categories of his scientific worldview. The entrance to the new passage was smaller than he'd expected, a vertical crack in the limestone barely wide enough to squeeze through sideways. Beyond it, his headlamp revealed a corridor that stretched into darkness, the walls unnervingly smooth, as if polished by hands rather than water. "This is it?" he asked Madison. "According to the survey notes, it looks different from the rest of the cave." She nodded, and he caught something in her expression, a wariness she was trying to hide. The previous team noted the same thing. They theorized it might be a different geological formation, maybe an older section of the cave system that developed separately. Trevor didn't believe that. He'd seen a lot of rock in his life, and this didn't look like natural formation. It looked like excavation, like something had carved this passage with purpose. But he was a scientist, and scientists didn't turn back because of feelings. He squeezed through the crack and into the passage beyond. The first thing he noticed was the temperature. It should have been warmer as they descended. Caves maintained consistent temperatures regardless of depth, but this passage was cold. Properly cold. Cold enough to see his breath. Cold enough to make his fingers ache inside his gloves. The second thing he noticed was the silence. Not the ordinary silence of underground spaces, but an aggressive silence. A silence that seemed to push back against sound, to absorb their voices and footsteps and leave nothing behind. The third thing he noticed was the knocking. It came from ahead, somewhere in the darkness beyond his headlamp's reach. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, then silence, then 3 more. "Hello?" he called. His voice fell flat, echoless. "Is someone there?" 3 knocks. Closer now. "Madison, there's someone in here." The ranger squeezed through the crack behind him, followed by Chen and his wife. Their lights joined his, pushing the darkness back another few feet. The passage continued straight ahead, featureless, empty. "I don't see anyone," Madison said. Her voice was tight. "I heard knocking." 3 beats repeated. Chen's wife, her name was Sarah, Trevor remembered, stepped forward, her surveying equipment in hand. "I heard it too, coming from that direction." She pointed down the passage. They stood in silence, listening. Nothing. The cold pressed against them like water, like pressure, like the weight of all that rock above them made manifest. And then the knocking came again. Not from ahead, from behind, from the crack they'd just come through. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, and then a sound that might have been laughter, if laughter could be made of stone, grinding against stone. The crack was gone. Where the entrance had been, where Trevor had squeezed through less than 2 minutes ago, there was only wall. Solid limestone, continuous with the passage around it, as if the opening had never existed. "That's not possible," Chen said. His voice cracked on the last word. Madison was already at the wall, running her hands over the stone, pressing, searching for the crack that had to be there. "It's solid. It's completely solid. This can't." The knocking came again. From ahead now. From behind. From inside the walls themselves, surrounding them in a rhythm that was almost like language, almost like words in a tongue older than speech. Trevor's scientific mind was trying to process what was happening, trying to construct explanations that fit within the laws of physics he'd spent his life studying. Optical illusion, disorientation, some kind of limestone formation that mimicked solid rock, but was actually permeable. But underneath the rational thoughts, deeper than logic, something ancient in his brain was screaming at him to run, to flee, to get out of this place that should not exist. He couldn't run. There was nowhere to run to. "We go forward," he said. "It's the only option. Whatever this is, there has to be another way out." No one argued. They started walking, their footsteps impossibly loud in the pressing silence, their headlamps carving a small pocket of light through darkness that seemed to breathe around them, contracting and expanding in rhythms that matched the knocking in the walls. Madison had stopped trying to reach base on the radio. The static that answered her wasn't random. It pulsed in patterns, 3 beats repeated, mocking her attempts to call for help. The passage had been going for what felt like hours. though her watch showed only 40 minutes since they'd entered. The walls were changing, the smooth limestone giving way to something else, something that looked almost like organic tissue, ridged and striated, glistening with moisture that was too warm, too viscous. "Does anyone else see that?" Sarah whispered. Ahead, at the very edge of their lights, something moved. Not an animal. The motion was wrong, too fluid, like shadow given form. It retreated as they approached, staying just beyond visibility, but Madison could feel it watching them, could feel its attention like a physical weight. "Hello?" Trevor called again. His voice was hoarse. "We don't mean any harm. We're just trying to find a way out." The knocking stopped. In the silence that followed, Madison heard something else. A voice, faint and distant, speaking words she almost recognized. It sounded like her father, who had died when she was 12. It sounded like him calling her name the way he used to call her in for dinner from the backyard of her childhood home. "Maddie. Maddie, come find me. I'm right here. I've been waiting so long." "Don't listen to it," she said. "Whatever you hear, don't listen. It's not real." But Sarah was already walking forward, her headlamp fixed on something Madison couldn't see. "Chen? Chen, is that you? Where are you going?" Madison spun around. Chen was gone. He'd been right behind her. She'd heard his footsteps, felt his presence, but the passage behind them was empty. Just darkness, stretching back the way they'd come, punctuated by the slow drip of that too warm moisture from the walls. "Chen!" Sarah's scream echoed once and then died, swallowed by the hungry silence. "Chen!" The knocking started again, louder now, faster, not from the walls anymore, but from everywhere at once, filling the passage with a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat, like the pulse of something vast and ancient that had been sleeping beneath the earth for longer than humanity had existed. And then Trevor was gone too. Madison turned at the sound of his voice, a startled cry cut short, and her headlamp found only empty space where he'd been standing. His equipment was on the ground, pack and surveying tools scattered as if dropped in sudden terror, but Trevor himself had vanished. No footprints leading away, no sign of struggle, just absence, sudden and complete. "He's with us now," the voice said. It wasn't her father anymore. It was something else, something that wore voices like masks, cycling through sounds it had collected from the darkness over centuries. "He understands now. He sees what we see. Come find him, Maddie. Come see what's at the bottom." Sarah was frozen, her light flickering, her breathing rapid and shallow. "What do we do? What do we do?" Madison grabbed her arm and started moving, forward, because back was gone, because the passage behind them had closed like a throat swallowing. Her headlamp caught shapes in the darkness ahead, impossible shapes that didn't resolve into anything her mind could process. Angles that bent wrong, spaces that contained more interior than exterior, doorways that opened onto darkness so pure it seemed to drink the light. And in that darkness, at the threshold of one of those wrong doorways, she saw Trevor. He was standing with his back to her, shoulders slumped, head bowed. He wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, as far as she could tell. But he was there, solid, real, not vanished after all. "Trevor!" She ran toward him, dragging Sarah behind her. "Trevor, we have to keep moving, we have to—" He turned around. The face that looked at her was Trevor's face, but the expression was wrong. The eyes were wrong. Too deep, too dark, holding depths that no human eyes should contain. When he smiled, there were too many teeth, arranged in patterns that followed no biological logic. "I understand now," he said, in a voice that was Trevor's and wasn't, that echoed with harmonics that made Madison's skull ache. "I see what they see. The geometry beneath the geometry. The shape of the space between spaces. It's beautiful, Madison. It's so beautiful. Come see. Come down. They're waiting for you. They've been waiting for so long." Behind him, the darkness moved. Shapes emerged from it. Small shapes, child-sized, but wrong in their proportions. Their joints bending backward. Their skin gray as old stone. They had faces like collapsed mine shafts. Mouths like tunnel entrances, eyes that reflected her headlamp with no light of their own. They were knocking on the walls, on the floor, on themselves. A rhythm that filled the passage with sound and meaning. And Madison realized with horror that she was starting to understand it, starting to hear the words in the knocking. Come down, come down. The earth is hollow and we are what fills it. Come down and be with us forever. She ran. She didn't know how. The passage should have been a dead end, should have been closed behind her, but somehow there was space to run, darkness to flee through, and she was pulling Sarah along, and Sarah was screaming, and the knocking was everywhere, in her ears, in her bones, in her brain. Light. Real light. Daylight, gray and cold, filtering through a crack in the stone ahead. Madison threw herself at it, squeezed through a gap that scraped skin from her arms and face and tumbled out onto frozen grass under an October sky. She lay there, gasping, staring up at clouds that moved normally, at a sun that occupied the proper position in the heavens, at a world that followed the rules she understood. Sarah collapsed beside her, sobbing, alive, real. The entrance to the cave was 50 feet away, the main entrance, the breathing mouth, exhaling its warm mist into the cold air as if nothing had happened. They had gone in at 9 a.m. Madison's watch read 9:47 a.m. 47 minutes. They had been down there for 47 minutes. It had felt like days. The search took 3 weeks. Rangers and rescue teams and volunteers from 5 states combed every inch of Wind Cave's mapped passages, searching for Trevor and Chen. They found no trace. No equipment, no remains. The passage Madison described, the smooth walls, the cold corridor, the impossible doorways, was not on any survey. The crack she'd squeezed through to escape opened onto a tourist route, 2 miles from the junction room, in a section of the cave she'd never visited. The official report listed both men as missing, presumed deceased due to cave accident. The report didn't mention the knocking, didn't mention the doorways, didn't mention Trevor's face, wrong and smiling, or the things that had emerged from the darkness behind him. Sarah Chen left the country. Last Madison heard, she was living in New Zealand, as far from caves as geography allowed. She never spoke publicly about what happened. She never responded to Madison's messages. Madison requested a transfer. She works at Theodore Roosevelt National Park now, in the Badlands of North Dakota, where the earth is flat and open and the sky goes on forever. She hasn't been underground since October 9th, 2011. But sometimes, late at night, she hears knocking. It comes from the walls of her cabin, from the floor beneath her bed, from somewhere deep underground, transmitted through hundreds of miles of rock, a message from something that hasn't forgotten her. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. A rhythm she can almost understand, that's becoming clearer every time she hears it. Come down, it says. Come back. We've been waiting. We'll always be waiting. She started having dreams about smooth passages and wrong doorways and a darkness that goes down forever. In the dreams, she's walking toward something, toward the bottom, toward the place where the knocking originates, toward Trevor, who stands in the darkness with his 2 deep eyes and his too wide smile, waiting to show her what he's learned. The geometry beneath the geometry. The shape of the space between spaces. She wakes up sweating, her hands pressed against the floor as if feeling for vibrations, feeling for knocking. Part of her wants to cover her ears, block out the sound, forget that any of it ever happened. But another part, a part that grows larger every night, wants to find the nearest cave entrance and start walking down. She doesn't know how much longer she can resist. The earth is patient. The darkness remembers. And far below the surface of Wind Cave National Park, something is still knocking, waiting for her to answer. Location: Mammoth Cave National Park, Kentucky. Date: February 7th, 2003. The cave breathed. Garrett Henson had worked underground for 11 years, guiding tourists through the historic section of Mammoth Cave. And he had never gotten used to that breath. The slow, barely perceptible movement of air through 400 miles of passages. The exhalation of a living thing so vast that humans were nothing more than bacteria crawling through its lungs. He stood at the natural entrance, watching the morning mist curl from the dark mouth of the cave into the frozen February air, and felt the familiar mixture of reverence and unease that the mountain always inspired in him. His grandfather had been a coal miner in Harlan County. His father had worked the gypsum operations in the western Kentucky caves before the Park Service shut them down. Garrett was the third generation of Hensons to make his living underground, though his work involved flashlights and tour groups rather than pickaxes and headlamps. The family connection to the deep places ran in his blood like an inheritance he had never asked for, a comfort with darkness that most surface people would never understand. He knew the sounds a cave made, the drip of water on limestone, the whisper of air through narrow passages, the way silence itself had texture and weight in places where no light had ever reached. He also knew the sounds a cave shouldn't make. The morning routine was second nature. Check the weather report, verify that the ice storm hadn't blocked any access roads, review the tour schedule for the day. February was the quietest month. Most visitors came in summer when the cave's constant 54 degrees offered relief from the Kentucky humidity. Today's schedule showed only one tour, the Wild Cave Tour at 10 a.m., a 6-hour crawl through undeveloped passages that required participants to squeeze through gaps barely wider than their shoulders. 4 guests had registered. Garrett would be leading alone since his usual partner had called in sick with the flu that was making its way through the staff. He was reviewing the waiver forms when the radio on his belt crackled. "Garrett, this is dispatch. You copy?" He keyed the response. "Dispatch, Garrett here. Go ahead. Got a heads up for you. Maintenance crew reported some weird acoustics in the Violet City section yesterday. Said they heard knocking sounds from behind the walls like someone tapping on the rock. Couldn't locate the source. Probably just thermal expansion or water movement, but I wanted you to know in case your tour group mentions anything." Garrett felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the February air. "Copy that, dispatch. Did maintenance investigate?" They checked the adjacent passages, didn't find anything, logged it as unexplained acoustics, and moved on. You know how the cave is. Always making noises that don't have obvious sources. "Yeah," Garrett said. "I know how the cave is." He signed off and stood for a moment in the gray morning light, watching his breath cloud in front of his face. Knocking sounds. His grandfather used to tell stories about knocking sounds, back when Garrett was young enough to sit on the old man's knee and listen to tales of the deep places. The Tommy knockers, Grandpa Henson had called them, little spirits that lived in the mines that tapped on the walls to warn of danger, or to lure the unwary into passages that went nowhere good. Cornish superstition, brought over by immigrant miners in the 1800s. Garrett had always assumed the stories were just that. Stories. The kind of folklore that accumulated around dangerous work like moss on a stone. But his grandfather had believed. Right up until the day he died, the old man had insisted that something lived in the deep places, something that knocked and whispered and waited. Garrett shook off the memory and headed for the visitor center to meet his tour group. Allison Price had signed up for the Wild Cave Tour because she wanted to prove something to herself. She wasn't sure what exactly. Maybe that she could handle fear, could push through the claustrophobic terror that had plagued her since childhood. Maybe that she was braver than her ex-husband had always claimed, stronger than the voice in her head that whispered she wasn't capable of hard things. Whatever the reason, she had driven 3 hours from Louisville in an ice storm to crawl through holes in the ground, and she was determined to see it through. The visitor center was nearly empty when she arrived. 3 other participants waited near the tour desk. A young couple who kept touching each other's hands with the nervous energy of recent engagement, and a middle-aged man in expensive outdoor gear who introduced himself as a caving enthusiast from Cincinnati. Allison nodded politely and tried to calm the flutter of anxiety in her chest. The guide appeared a few minutes later, a tall man in his late 30s with the weathered look of someone who spent his life in places where the sun didn't reach. He introduced himself as Garrett, and led them through a safety briefing that covered helmet protocol, the importance of staying with the group, and what to do if anyone experienced panic in a tight space. The passages we'll be crawling through are narrow, Garrett said, his voice calm and measured. Some of them require you to exhale completely to fit through. If you feel overwhelmed at any point, let me know immediately. There's no shame in turning back. The cave will still be here tomorrow. Allison noticed that he kept glancing toward the entrance as he spoke, as if expecting something to emerge from the darkness. She filed the observation away and focused on strapping her helmet correctly. The descent began. The first hour was almost pleasant. The historic section of the cave was well lit and spacious. The passages tall enough to walk upright. The walls marked with the signatures of 19th century visitors who had explored by candlelight. Garrett pointed out formations and told stories. The tuberculosis hospital that had operated underground in the 1840s, the mummies found in the saltpeter mines, the endless miles of passage that remained unexplored. His voice echoed off the limestone in ways that made it seem to come from everywhere at once. Then they left the lights behind. The transition was gradual at first, maintained passages giving way to rougher ground, electric lights replaced by the beams of their headlamps. But somewhere around the 2-hour mark, as they descended deeper into the mountain, Allison became aware that the quality of the darkness had changed. It wasn't just the absence of light anymore. It was something thicker, heavier, a darkness with presence and weight. When she turned off her headlamp for a moment, Garrett had suggested they all try it to experience true cave dark. She couldn't see her hand in front of her face. She couldn't see anything at all. The darkness pressed against her eyes like a physical force, and for one terrible moment she was certain that something in that darkness was pressing back. She turned her light on faster than she meant to, drawing a concerned look from Garrett. "You okay?" "Fine," she said. "Just, it's darker than I expected. 400 feet of solid rock above us. No light has ever reached this deep. Not in 4 billion years." Garrett's voice was matter of fact, but his eyes kept moving, scanning the shadows at the edge of their lamplight. "The cave was here before humans existed. It'll be here after we're gone. We're just passing through." They continued downward. The knocking started in the 3rd hour. Garrett heard it first, a faint tap-tap-tap from somewhere behind the walls, rhythmic, deliberate, like a miner's pickaxe striking stone. He stopped so suddenly that the young woman behind him nearly walked into his back. "What is it?" the caving enthusiast asked. "Why did we stop?" "Quiet." Garrett held up a hand, listening. The sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. Then tap, tap, tap. Slightly closer now, slightly louder. A pattern, a communication. "Is that water dripping?" the engaged woman asked, her voice pitched high with the beginnings of fear. "No." Garrett kept his voice steady through an act of will. "Water doesn't knock in patterns. Everyone stay close. We're going to keep moving." But as they continued through the passage, the knocking followed. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the rock all around them. A sound that had no visible source. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Always the same rhythm, always just behind them or just ahead, never where their lights could reach. Garrett keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Garrett in Violet City section. We're experiencing the acoustic anomaly you mentioned. Knocking sounds, source unknown. Please confirm there's no maintenance activity in adjacent passages." Static answered, a long hiss of white noise that seemed to pulse in time with the knocking. "Dispatch, do you copy?" Nothing. They were too deep, too far from the repeaters that allowed radio communication in the upper sections. They were alone in the dark with 400 miles of cave stretching out in every direction, and something was knocking on the walls. "We should go back," the caving enthusiast said. His expensive gear suddenly looked very fragile against the immensity of the stone around them. "Whatever that sound is, I don't like it." Agreed. Garrett began to turn the group around. "Stay calm. Stay together. We'll head back the way we came and—" He stopped. The passage behind them, the passage they had just walked through, was wrong. The ceiling was lower than it should be, the walls closer. And carved into the limestone, in letters that looked decades old, were words that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. "They're still working." below the words, scratch marks in the stone, tally marks, hundreds of them, as if someone had been counting days or years in the darkness. The knocking grew louder. Allison saw them first. They were at the edge of the lamplight, just beyond where the beams could reach. Shapes that might have been human hunched and twisted, moving through the stone itself as if the rock were water. She opened her mouth to scream, and nothing came out. Her voice had abandoned her, fled up toward the surface and the light in the world where things made sense. The shapes knocked on the walls as they moved, tap, tap, tap. Their hands, if they were hands, struck the limestone in perfect unison, a rhythm that had been old when the first miners broke through into these passages. They were small, she realized, smaller than they should be, as if the weight of the mountain had compressed them over centuries of endless labor in the dark. Don't look at them. Garrett's voice was barely a whisper. Don't acknowledge them. My grandfather always said. He swallowed hard. He said the Tommyknockers take notice when you notice them. Just keep moving. Don't look. But Allison couldn't stop looking. One of the shapes had separated from the others. It moved closer, still knocking. Tap, tap, tap. And as it reached the very edge of the light, she saw its face. Or what remained of its face. Features worn smooth by time, eyes that were pits of absolute darkness, a mouth that opened and closed without sound. It was looking at her. It had been looking for a very long time. It raised one twisted hand and pointed deeper into the cave. No, Garrett said, grabbing Allison's arm. We go up. We go toward the surface. Whatever they want us to see down there, we don't want to see it. But the passage upward was closing. Allison watched in horror as the ceiling lowered inch by inch, the walls pressing inward like the throat of something swallowing. The engaged couple screamed. The caving enthusiast dropped to his knees, hyperventilating, and the Tommyknockers kept knocking, kept pointing, kept waiting with patience that had outlasted civilizations. The cave, Allison heard herself say, it's not letting us leave. There's always another way. Garrett's voice cracked, but he kept moving, kept searching for a passage that wasn't shrinking. 400 miles of cave. There's always another passage, always another. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was the silence of something holding its breath, something waiting to see what the small creatures trapped in its depths would do next. Allison felt the weight of the mountain above her, felt the years, the centuries, that these passages had existed in perfect darkness, and understood with terrible clarity that human beings were not supposed to be here. They had broken into a place that was never meant for them, and now the place had noticed. A voice came from the darkness ahead, small, rough, like gravel, scraping against stone. Working, it said. Still working. So much deeper to go. They found the way out through a passage that Garrett had never seen before. It wasn't on any map. It wasn't in any of the 400 miles of surveyed cave. It simply appeared when the Tommyknockers stopped blocking their retreat, a narrow crack in the wall that hadn't existed 10 minutes earlier, barely wide enough for a human body to squeeze through. This is wrong, the caving enthusiast kept saying as they crawled. This can't be right. This passage isn't real, but it was real enough to crawl through, real enough to scrape their knees and elbows, real enough to eventually, after what felt like hours but might have been minutes, open into a chamber with a distant pinpoint of gray light that could only be the surface. They emerged from a hole in the hillside half a mile from the visitor center, blinking in the weak February sun like creatures born in darkness finally seeing the sky. The ice storm had passed. The world was coated in crystal, every branch and blade of grass glittering with frozen rain. Allison counted the group. Garrett, the engaged couple, clutching each other and crying. Herself. 3. Where's the man from Cincinnati? She asked. The caving enthusiast, he was right behind me. He was... Garrett's face went pale. He turned back toward the hole they had crawled through, but there was no hole. The hillside was solid, unbroken, as if the passage had never existed at all. They searched for 3 days. Cadaver dogs, thermal imaging, every surveyed passage in the Violet City section. They found no trace of the missing man. They found no passage matching the one they had crawled through. They found no explanation for how 4 people had entered the cave and only 3 had emerged. What they did find carved into a wall deep in an undeveloped section that no human should have been able to reach were 4 words in handwriting that matched the missing man's signature on his waiver form. Still working. So deep. Below the words, fresh tally marks had been scratched into the stone. 1 for each day since the disappearance. Someone was still counting. Garrett Henson resigned from the Park Service 3 weeks later. He told his supervisors it was burnout, that 11 years underground had finally caught up with him. He didn't tell them about the knocking he still heard some nights, faint and rhythmic, coming from the basement of his house. He didn't tell them about the dreams where he crawled through endless passages that kept getting narrower, where shapes moved just beyond his lamplight, where a voice that sounded almost human whispered about how much deeper there was to go. He moved to Arizona, desert country. No caves for hundreds of miles. He took a job at a hardware store and tried very hard not to think about the 400 miles of darkness beneath the Kentucky hills, the centuries of miners and explorers who had vanished into passages that weren't on any map, the small twisted shapes that knocked and knocked and knocked. His grandfather had believed in the Tommy knockers, had insisted they were real, right up until the day he died. Garrett believed now too. Some nights when the Arizona wind howled across the desert and the darkness outside his window felt just a little too heavy, he thought he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Faint. Impossibly faint. As if coming from very far away. Or from very deep below. The mountain remembers, his grandfather used to say. The deep places remember everyone who passes through. And the Tommy knockers keep working. Keep digging. Keep going deeper. They've got quotas to fill, shifts to finish, and they're always looking for more hands. Garrett checks his basement every night before bed, makes sure the concrete floor is solid, uncracked, undisturbed. So far, it always is. So far. Location, Shenandoah National Park, Virginia. Date, October 29, 2016. The last light bled out of the sky at 1847 hours, and Nathan Vance watched it go from the hood of the patrol truck parked at the Pinnacle's overlook. The Blue Ridge stretched away in both directions, ridge after ridge fading into darkness like waves frozen mid-crash, and the valley below had already surrendered to shadow. In another week, the clocks would fall back and sunset would come even earlier. But for now, this particular quality of October darkness felt almost aggressive. A tide rushing in to claim territory the sun had abandoned. Radio check, Nathan said, keying his handheld. Sam, Kyle, confirm positions. Samantha's voice came back first, clear despite the terrain. Sam here. I'm at the Big Meadows campground, starting my sweep of the sea loop. Quiet so far. Saw a family packing up about 20 minutes ago, last one's out. Then Kyle. Kyle at Skyland. Just finished checking the lodge perimeter, all secure. Heading down to the Stony Man trailhead next. Copy both. Standard protocol. Check in every 30, sooner if anything's off. Weather service says clear skies but temps dropping to the low 30s by midnight. Stay warm. Nathan climbed back into the truck and pulled out onto Skyline Drive, the park's 100-mile scenic route that ran along the crest of the mountains. During the day, especially during peak foliage season, the road was a slow parade of leaf peepers and photographers. At night, after the gates closed, it belonged to the rangers, and to whatever else moved through the darkness between the overlooks. He had been with Shenandoah for 8 years, the last 3 as night patrol supervisor. He knew these mountains the way he knew the inside of his own house. Every curve of the road, every pull-off, every trail that branched into the forest. He knew the sounds too. The rustle of deer in the underbrush, the distant yip of coyotes, the occasional crash of a black bear moving through deadfall. Normal sounds, expected sounds, the soundtrack of a healthy Appalachian ecosystem doing what it had done for thousands of years. What he didn't know, what none of them talked about officially, was why the night patrols had been increased this month. 3 separate reports from campers over the past 2 weeks, all describing the same thing. Deer that didn't move right. Deer that stood on their hind legs. Deer with too many eyes, or eyes in the wrong places, or legs that bent backward at the joint. The reports had been logged as wildlife disturbance, unverified, and filed away. But Nathan had seen the look on Chief Ranger Morrison's face when the 3rd one came in. Morrison had grown up in these mountains, hunted them with his father and grandfather. When Nathan asked him about the reports, Morrison had gone quiet for a long moment before answering. "There's things in these woods that don't have names in any field guide," he'd said. "My grandfather called them wrong-shaped deer. Said the Cherokee had older names, but he never learned them. Said it was better not to know." He'd looked at Nathan with eyes that held no humor at all. "If you see one, don't look it in the eyes. Don't run. And whatever you do, don't let it know you've noticed. Just keep walking like nothing's wrong, and pray it loses interest." Nathan had nodded and said nothing because what was there to say? He was a park ranger, not a folklorist. His job was to patrol the roads, check the campgrounds, make sure the park was secure for the night. He dealt in practical concerns, lost hikers, vehicle breakdowns, the occasional drunk who thought it would be fun to drive the switchbacks at 60 miles an hour. He did not deal in wrong-shaped deer, but he had authorized the 3-person night patrol anyway, just in case. Samantha Chen had worked parks for 5 years, the last 2 at Shenandoah, and she had never been afraid of the dark. The dark was just an absence of light. It didn't change anything fundamental about the world. It just made it harder to see. She had walked these trails at midnight 100 times, her headlamp cutting a small circle of visibility through the black. And she had never encountered anything worse than a startled skunk. Tonight felt different. She couldn't say why exactly. The Big Meadows campground was empty, as expected. The last seasonal sites had closed October 15th. And the few remaining campers had cleared out before sunset. Her flashlight beam swept across picnic tables and fire rings and bear boxes. All the familiar infrastructure of a park campground. All utterly ordinary. The silence was normal too. This late in the season, even the insects had gone quiet, and the only sounds were her own footsteps and the occasional creak of branches in a wind she couldn't feel. But something was watching her. She knew it the way you know someone is staring at you across a crowded room. A prickling at the back of the neck, a weight on the skin that had no physical source. She stopped at the edge of the sea loop, where the campground bordered the forest, and shone her light into the trees. Eyes reflected back. That wasn't unusual. Deer eyes reflected green gold in flashlight beams, a common sight in any eastern forest. Sam had seen it 1,000 times. But these eyes were wrong. They were too high off the ground, 7 feet, maybe 8. And there were too many of them. 4 points of reflected light where there should have been 2, arranged in a configuration that didn't match any animal she knew. She kept the light steady, her heart rate climbing. The eyes didn't blink. They didn't move. They just watched. Don't look it in the eyes. Don't run. Don't let it know you've noticed. Sam lowered her flashlight slowly, casually, as if she'd simply finished her sweep of the tree line. She turned and walked back toward the loop road, measuring her pace, fighting the urge to sprint. Behind her, she heard something move, not the light rustle of a deer stepping through leaves, but a heavier sound. A wrong sound, like something large shifting its weight in a way that shouldn't be possible. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice level. "Nathan, this is Sam. I've got eyes on wildlife activity at the sea loop tree line. Unusual behavior. Recommend I return to the truck." Static. Then Nathan's voice. "Copy, Sam. What kind of unusual behavior? How do you describe it? How do you say I think I saw a deer standing 8 feet tall with 4 eyes?" "Just unusual. I'd rather discuss in person." A pause. "Copy. Return to your vehicle. I'm heading your way." Sam walked faster. The footsteps behind her kept pace. Kyle Brennan was the youngest of the 3, 6 months out of the seasonal training program and still learning the rhythms of the park. He had drawn the Skyland assignment because it was considered the easiest of the 3 patrol zones. A few buildings to check, a couple of short trails, Mostly straightforward work. Nathan had called it a milk run and told him to radio in if anything seemed off. Everything seemed off tonight. The Skyland Resort complex sat empty, its lodge and cabins closed for the season, its parking lots bare. Kyle's flashlight caught the gleam of dark windows and locked doors, everything exactly as it should be. But the silence here was oppressive, a physical thing that pressed against his eardrums, and he found himself holding his breath as he walked the perimeter. He was passing the trailhead to Stony Man Summit when he heard the sound. Hoofbeats, coming from the trail. Kyle stopped, listening. Deer didn't usually run at night unless something spooked them. Maybe a coyote or a bear moving through. The hoofbeats were getting closer, fast, too fast and wrong somehow, the rhythm off, like an animal running with the wrong number of legs. He raised his flashlight toward the trail. The thing that emerged from the darkness wore the shape of a deer the way a human might wear a costume that didn't quite fit. It had the general outline right, 4 legs, a body, a head with antlers. But the proportions were all wrong. The legs were too long, jointed at angles that made Kyle's eyes hurt to follow. The neck stretched farther than any deer's neck should stretch, and the head at the end of it was turned backward, facing him even as the body continued forward. It stopped at the edge of the parking lot, 20 feet away. Close enough that Kyle could see its eyes, not 2 but 6 arranged in a vertical line down the center of its face, all of them reflecting his flashlight beam with that green-gold shine. The mouth opened. Kyle expected a deer's bleat, maybe, or some animal sound. What came out was his name. Kyle. The voice was wrong, a buzzing approximation of human speech. Kyle. We see you, Kyle. He ran. He didn't think about protocol, didn't think about not showing fear, didn't think about anything except getting away from that voice, that face, those eyes. He sprinted for the patrol truck, his boots pounding on asphalt, his flashlight beam swinging wildly. Behind him he heard the hoofbeats resume, not running away but following, keeping pace, that wrong rhythm getting closer. He reached the truck and yanked open the door, threw himself inside, slammed it shut. The locks engaged with a solid chunk. He was safe. He was in the vehicle. Nothing could. A face appeared at the driver's side window. Not a deer's face. Not anymore. It had rearranged itself while chasing him, and now it pressed against the glass with something that was almost human, almost recognizable except for the eyes, still 6 of them, still in that vertical line, still watching him with an intelligence that had nothing to do with any animal. It smiled with too many teeth. Kyle, the voice came through the glass, muffled but clear. Let us in, Kyle. We want to know you. We want to wear you. Kyle grabbed the radio with shaking hands. Nathan, this is Kyle. I need immediate assistance at Skyland. There's something at my truck. It's at my window. Oh God, it's looking at me. The window cracked. Nathan heard Kyle's transmission break into screaming, then static. He was already pushing the truck to 60 on the winding road, faster than was safe, faster than regulations allowed. But regulations didn't account for the sound of one of his rangers screaming into a radio. He tried to raise Kyle again. Nothing. Tried Sam. Nothing. The radio had gone dead, or something was blocking it, or... His headlights caught movement ahead. He slammed the brakes, the truck fishtailing on the curve, coming to a stop sideways across both lanes. In the wash of the headlights, 3 figures stood in the road. They looked like deer. At first. The way something in a nightmare looks like a familiar thing until you focus on it too closely. They stood on their hind legs. 7 feet tall, maybe 8. Their front legs hung at their sides like arms, ending in hooves that flexed like fingers. Their heads were deer-shaped, but the faces were wrong. Too flat, too expressive, with mouths that stretched too wide and eyes. So many eyes, reflecting the headlights in dozens of points of green-gold light. Nathan's hand found his sidearm. He'd never drawn it on duty, not once in 8 years. What good would a pistol do against something that could rearrange its own face? One of the figures stepped forward. Its mouth opened. Nathan. His own voice came out of that impossible throat. Nathan Vance, 8 years in the park. Wife named Catherine. Daughter named Lily, age 6. You're afraid of the dark, Nathan. You never told anyone, but we know. We always know. The other two began to circle the truck, moving to the sides, cutting off any escape route. They moved wrong, too smooth, like they were gliding rather than walking, their joints bending in directions that made his stomach lurch. We've been here so long, the first one said, still in Nathan's voice. Longer than the road, longer than the buildings, longer than your kind. We learned to look like the things you expect to see, but sometimes we get tired of hiding. Sometimes we want to be seen. The radio crackled. Sam's voice, desperate. Nathan, I'm at the truck. There's 3 of them surrounding me. They're talking in my voice, Nathan. They know things. They know about my sister. They know about... The transmission cut off. Nathan looked at the creatures surrounding his truck. They had stopped moving, waiting, watching. Those horrible eyes reflected his headlights with patient, ancient hunger. What do you want? The thing that wore his voice tilted its head at an angle that would have snapped a human neck. We want what we've always wanted. To know, to learn, to become. It stepped closer, close enough that Nathan could see the texture of its skin. Not fur, not hide, but something in between. Something that seemed to shift and ripple in the light. You have such interesting shapes, such interesting fears. We collect them. We wear them. And then we go looking for more. The window beside Nathan's head began to crack, fine lines spreading through the glass like frost, like something pressing against it from outside, though all 3 figures were still in front of the truck. There were more of them. He couldn't see them, but they were there, pressing against the metal and glass surrounding him. You can run, the thing said. We like it when you run. It helps us learn how you move, how your fear looks from behind. The window shattered. The search party found the trucks at dawn. Nathan's vehicle was stopped sideways across Skyline Drive at mile marker 42. Both front windows broken inward, glass scattered across the seats. Sam's truck was at the Big Meadows parking lot, driver's door hanging open, radio microphone dangling by its cord. Kyle's was at Skyland, every window shattered, deep scratches gouged into the metal of the roof and hood. Scratches that the forensic team would later note didn't match any known animal. No blood, no bodies, no sign of struggle beyond the damaged vehicles. 3 Rangers vanished in a single night. The official report cited unknown circumstances and ongoing investigation. Chief Ranger Morrison quietly retired the following spring. Before he left, he gathered the remaining staff and told them the night patrols would be discontinued, permanently. No exceptions. There are things in these mountains we don't understand, he said. Things that were here before us and will be here after. Our job is to protect the visitors. We can't protect them from something we can't explain. So we close the gates at sunset. We tell people to leave before dark, and we don't go looking for answers that don't want to be found. Someone asked about the 3 missing Rangers. Morrison didn't answer. He just shook his head and walked away. The park still closes at dark. The gates still lock at sunset. And the Rangers who work there now know, without ever being officially told, that you don't drive Skyline Drive after nightfall. You don't walk the trails when the sun goes down. And if you ever see a deer that looks wrong, too tall, too still, with too many eyes, you look away. You keep walking. You pretend you didn't see, because they're still out there, in the darkness between the overlooks, in the forests that border the road, in the places where the headlights don't reach, watching, learning, wearing new shapes. And sometimes, on nights when the moon is dark and the wind is still, hikers at the backcountry shelters hear voices calling from the trees. Familiar voices, voices that know their names. No one answers, no one ever answers. But the voices keep calling anyway. They have all the time in the world. Location: Badlands National Park, South Dakota. Date: May 24, 2014. The sky had been wrong all day. Ryan Caldwell noticed it during his morning patrol, before the Weather Service had issued the first watch, before the radar had painted the western horizon in shades of red and purple that meant nothing good. He'd worked at Badlands for 11 years, had seen more severe weather than most meteorologists saw in a lifetime, and he'd learned to read the sky the way other people read faces. Today, the sky was angry. Not the ordinary anger of an approaching storm system. Something deeper, older, a tension in the atmosphere that made his teeth ache and his skin prickle with static that had no source. He stood at the pinnacle's overlook, watching the clouds build over the Black Hills 60 miles to the west. The formations were already impressive, towering cumulus that punched into the stratosphere like fists, their tops flattening into anvils that spread across the horizon in a line of white and gray. By afternoon, those clouds would organize into supercells. By evening, they would spawn tornadoes. Ryan had seen it happen 100 times. It was part of the job, part of life on the Great Plains during the month of May. But something about today felt different. He keyed his radio, the familiar weight of it comfortable in his hand. "Dispatch, this is Unit 6, completing morning sweep of the North Loop. Weather conditions deteriorating faster than forecast. Requesting updated briefing. Over." The response came clear. They were still well within range. The park's repeater system, one of the best in the region. "Copy, Unit 6. National Weather Service has upgraded the outlook to moderate risk for the eastern Wyoming and western South Dakota region. Tornado watch expected by 1400. All units advised to complete visitor sweeps and prepare for possible closures. Over." "Understood. I'll finish the Sage Creek area and head back to the station. Unit 6 out." Ryan took one last look at the western sky before climbing into his truck. The clouds were moving fast, faster than they should have been given the upper-level winds, and there was a color to them, a greenish tinge at the bases that he'd only seen a handful of times in his career. Each of those times had ended badly. One of those times had ended with 3 people dead in a campground that hadn't been evacuated in time. He wouldn't let that happen again. The drive back to the Ben Rifle Visitor Center took 40 minutes, winding through the park's surreal landscape of eroded buttes and spires. The Badlands always looked alien to Ryan, even after more than a decade. A moonscape dropped into the middle of the prairie, striped in shades of pink and gray and white that no other place on Earth quite replicated. The Lakota had called it Mako Sika, the land that was bad, and Ryan had always thought that was unfair. The land wasn't bad. It was just honest. It didn't pretend to be gentle, didn't hide its harshness behind green grass and soft hills. What you saw was what you got. Beauty and danger in equal measure, inseparable. At the visitor center, he found the usual pre-storm chaos. Rangers coordinating closures, maintenance crews securing loose equipment, the interpretive staff answering questions from tourists who couldn't understand why they had to leave when the sky was still mostly blue. Ryan headed straight for the weather station in the back office, a cramped room filled with monitors and radar displays and the constant chatter of NOAA weather radio. "What are we looking at?" he asked Sarah Chen, the park's other meteorologist, who was already glued to the radar. "Nothing good." She pointed at the screen, where a line of storms was organizing along the Wyoming-South Dakota border. "The cap is breaking earlier than anyone expected. We've got 3 discrete supercells forming, and the environment is about as favorable as it gets. SPC is already hinting at a high-risk upgrade for this evening. Tornado potential. Significant. The hotograph is showing insane helicity values. If these storms can stay discrete, we're looking at long-track, violent tornadoes." She glanced at him, and he saw something in her eyes that he rarely saw in Sarah. Worry. "Ryan, I've been doing this for 15 years. This setup, it reminds me of May 3rd, 99. More. You remember?" He remembered. Everyone in the Plains weather community remembered. An F5 tornado with winds over 300 miles per hour, the most powerful ever recorded. 46 people dead, over $1 billion in damage, the kind of storm that redefined what people thought was possible. "Get everyone out of the backcountry," he said. "Close the campgrounds. I want the park buttoned up by 1600. "Already in progress." Sarah turned back to her screens. "There's one more thing. We've got a storm chaser registered at the Sage Creek campground. Ethan Marsh out of Norman, Oklahoma, PhD student at OU, working on his dissertation on supercell dynamics. He's been in the park for 3 days waiting for this system. Has he checked in today? Not since this morning. He told the ranger at the gate he was planning to position near the park's western boundary to intercept the storms as they crossed into South Dakota. Ryan felt his jaw tighten. Storm chasers were a constant headache during tornado season. Most of them were responsible professionals who understood the risks, but the ones who weren't could get themselves killed and take emergency responders down with them. Try to reach him on his registered frequency. Tell him the park is closing and he needs to evacuate. Already tried, no response. Of course not. Ryan grabbed his keys and headed for the door. Keep trying. I'll sweep the western boundary and see if I can find him. Ryan. Sarah's voice stopped him. Be careful out there. The atmosphere is strange today. I can't explain it. The data looks normal, but something feels off. He nodded. He'd felt it too. Keep the radio open. I'll check in every 30 minutes. The drive west took him through the heart of the park, past the eroded cathedrals of the wall, and into the open prairie beyond. Here the land flattened into an expanse of grass that rolled to the horizon in every direction, broken only by the occasional butte rising like an island from a sea of green. The sky dominated everything, a vast dome that seemed to press down on the earth with almost physical weight. And to the west the storms were coming. They were beautiful, in the terrible way that only severe weather could be beautiful. 3 supercells marched across the horizon in a line, their rotating updrafts visible even from 30 miles away, their anvils spreading eastward in a canopy of ice crystals that caught the afternoon light and glowed with an almost supernatural radiance. Lightning flickered in their cores, too frequent to count, and the distant rumble of thunder was constant, a low vibration that Ryan felt in his chest more than heard. He found Ethan Marsh's vehicle parked at a pullout near the park's western boundary, a white pickup truck bristling with weather instruments, a laptop open on the passenger seat showing radar data, camera equipment scattered across the back seat. The truck was empty. Ryan scanned the prairie. A quarter-mile to the north, a figure stood alone in the grass facing west, watching the approaching storms. Even from this distance, Ryan could see the man's posture. Not the alert readiness of an experienced chaser, but something else. Something frozen. He grabbed his radio as he started walking. Dispatch, Unit 6. I've located the storm chaser at the western boundary pullout. He appears to be on foot approximately 400 yards north of his vehicle. I'm making contact now. Over. Static answered him. Not the clean static of distance, but something else. A crackling that rose and fell in patterns that almost sounded like voices, like words in a language just beyond understanding. Dispatch, do you copy? Over. The static intensified, and beneath it, Ryan heard something that made him stop walking. Thunder, yes, but not ordinary thunder. A sound that rolled across the prairie with a rhythm that was almost like breathing, almost like wing beats. He looked up. The nearest supercell had crossed into the park while he'd been focused on the ground. It towered overhead now, a rotating wall of gray and green that blotted out half the sky. The updraft was clearly visible, a column of air spiraling upward with enough force to suspend hailstones the size of baseballs, to lift cars, to tear houses from their foundations. At its base, a lowering had formed, a dark mass of cloud that rotated with the lazy menace of a waking predator. And in that rotation, in the swirling chaos where the storm touched the earth, Ryan saw something that his mind refused to process. Wings. Not cloud formations that looked like wings, not pareidolia, not imagination, not the tricks that storm watching could play on tired eyes. Wings, vast and dark and real, emerging from the heart of the rotation, spreading across the sky in shapes that followed no natural law. They beat once, twice, and with each stroke the thunder rolled and the lightning flashed and the wind screamed across the prairie with a voice that sounded almost like language. Ryan ran. Ethan Marsh had come to the Badlands looking for the perfect storm. What he'd found was something else entirely. He'd been chasing for 8 years ever since he'd seen his first tornado as an undergraduate in Oklahoma. That experience had changed him, had shown him that there was beauty in destruction, order in chaos, patterns in the seemingly random violence of severe weather. He'd dedicated his life to understanding those patterns, to capturing them with instruments and cameras, to translating them into data that could save lives. He was good at what he did. The best in his program, his advisor said. A natural. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what he saw when the storm crossed into the park. He'd been watching the supercell approach, admiring its textbook structure. The crisp anvil, the striated updraft, the perfect corkscrew of the mesocyclone. It was the kind of storm he'd dreamed about intercepting, the kind that would give him enough data for 3 dissertations. He'd set up his instruments, started his cameras, checked his escape routes, everything by the book. Then the storm had spoken to him, not in words, not exactly, but in a voice that bypassed his ears entirely and resonated somewhere deeper, somewhere in the part of his brain that predated language, that remembered what it meant to be prey. "Look at me," the voice said. "See what I am." And Ethan had looked, and he had seen. The thing in the storm was not a cloud. It was not a pattern of air and moisture following the laws of thermodynamics. It was alive, conscious in a way that made human consciousness seem like a candle flame compared to the sun. It had wings that spanned miles, a body made of wind and lightning and the screaming fury of air tearing itself apart. Its eyes were the green glow at the heart of the mesocyclone, and when those eyes turned toward Ethan, he understood something that shattered every assumption he'd ever made about the universe. The storms weren't weather. They never had been. The things in the sky were hunters, ancient, patient, vast beyond human comprehension. They rode the jet stream across continents, fed on the energy released by temperature gradients and moisture differentials, and sometimes, when they were hungry, when they were angry, when some unknowable impulse moved them, they descended to the earth and took what they wanted. The tornado that was forming now wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was a talon reaching down, a claw extending from the body of something so large that its wings scraped the stratosphere. It was reaching for him, not randomly, not as an accident of timing and location. It was reaching for him because he had looked at it, because he had seen. "You wanted to understand the storm," the voice said. "Now you will." Ethan tried to run. His legs wouldn't move. The wind was screaming around him now, tearing at his clothes, ripping his instruments from their mounts and flinging them into the darkening sky. Debris swirled past him. Grass, dirt, rocks, pieces of wood from God knew where, but none of it touched him. He stood in a bubble of impossible calm at the center of the chaos, held in place by something that wasn't physical, that operated on rules his physics couldn't describe. The tornado touched down 100 yards away. Even through the roar of wind, he could hear it, not just the freight train sound that everyone described, but something underneath it. A voice, a song, a language that was older than humanity, older than the earth, older than the stars. "The Lakota knew," the voice said. "They called us Wakinyan. They understood that we are sacred, that we are dangerous, that to look upon us is to be changed forever. You wanted to see the heart of the storm, Ethan Marsh. Now you will carry it with you always." The thing in the sky descended. Not the tornado was just a limb, a finger, a single point of contact between worlds. The thing itself came down, a presence so vast that Ethan's mind couldn't hold it, could only perceive fragments. An eye the size of the sun, wings that beat with the rhythm of continental weather patterns, a beak that opened to reveal not a mouth but a void, a darkness that swallowed light and time and sanity. It looked at him. It looked at him. And Ethan understood that he would spend the rest of his life trying to draw what he saw, trying to capture it on paper, to give form to the formless, to communicate to anyone who would listen that the sky was not empty, that the storms were not mindless, that something lived in the atmosphere that humanity had never imagined, had never been meant to imagine. He understood that no one would ever believe him. The tornado passed over him, through him, around him. He felt the wind tear at his soul the way it tore at the prairie, felt something essential rip loose and scatter into the screaming dark. When it was over, when the roaring stopped and the calm returned and the supercell moved east toward Rapid City, Ethan was still standing. He was standing, but he wasn't whole anymore. He would never be whole again. Ryan found him 20 minutes later, after the tornado had roped out and the parent storm had weakened into a disorganized mass of rain and diminishing thunder. Ethan was still standing in the same spot, untouched by the debris field that surrounded him, his eyes fixed on the eastern horizon where the storm was disappearing into the gathering dusk. "Ethan? Ethan Marsh? Can you hear me?" No response. The man's face was slack, expressionless, his eyes moving in patterns that tracked nothing visible, or nothing visible to Ryan at least. He was breathing. His pulse, when Ryan checked it, was steady. But there was nobody home behind those eyes. Whatever Ethan Marsh had been before the storm, he wasn't that anymore. Ryan called for medical evacuation. While he waited, he tried to get Ethan to respond, to speak, to acknowledge his presence in any way. Nothing worked. The man just stood there, swaying slightly in the wind, his lips moving soundlessly, his hands twitching at his sides. Then Ryan noticed what Ethan was doing with his hands. He was drawing, tracing shapes in the air with his fingers over and over, the same pattern repeated endlessly. Wings. Vast curved wings attached to a body that Ryan's mind flinched away from, that he couldn't quite see even as Ethan's fingers sketched it again and again. The helicopter arrived as the sun set. The medics loaded Ethan onto a stretcher, and Ryan watched them fly east toward Rapid City, toward hospitals and doctors and explanations that would satisfy no one. He stood alone on the prairie as the stars came out, as the last of the storm clouds dissipated into wisps of nothing, as the sky returned to its normal immensity. But it didn't feel normal anymore. Ryan found himself looking up, scanning the darkness for movement, for shapes, for eyes that might be looking back. The wind whispered across the grass, and for a moment, just a moment, he thought he heard something in it. A voice, a word, a name that might have been his own. He got in his truck and drove back to the visitor center without stopping. Ethan Marsh was transferred to a psychiatric facility in Sioux Falls 3 days later. The official diagnosis was acute stress reaction with catatonic features, which was medical terminology for, "We don't know what happened to him." He didn't speak, didn't respond to stimuli, didn't do anything except draw. He drew constantly, on paper when they gave it to him, on walls when they didn't, on his own skin with his fingernails when nothing else was available. The same image, over and over, hundreds of times a day. A shape with wings, a body made of angles that didn't quite fit together, eyes that seemed to follow you even on paper. The doctors called it repetitive trauma processing. They said it would fade with time. It didn't fade. Ryan visited once 3 weeks after the incident. Ethan's room was covered in drawings, walls, floor, ceiling, every surface within reach. The same image, repeated in pencil and pen and crayon and blood from where he'd torn his fingernails trying to scratch it into concrete. The same wings, the same impossible body, the same eyes. And in the center of the room, Ethan sat cross-legged on his bed, drawing on a fresh sheet of paper. When Ryan entered, he looked up. For the first time since the storm, his eyes focused. His lips moved. "You saw it too," he whispered. His voice was rusty, damaged, the voice of a man who had screamed until his throat tore. "I can tell. You saw." Ryan didn't answer. He didn't have to. "It's still up there," Ethan said. He turned back to his drawing, his hand moving in the same patterns it had traced 10,000 times before. "It's always up there, watching, waiting. The storms aren't storms. They're doors. They're eyes. They're..." His voice broke. Tears streamed down his face, but his hand never stopped moving. "They're hunting. Always hunting. And now that we've seen them, they can see us. Forever. They'll always be able to see us." Ryan left the facility and drove back to the Badlands. He submitted his resignation the next morning. The official reason was personal circumstances. The real reason was that he couldn't look at the sky anymore, couldn't watch clouds form without searching for shapes in them, couldn't hear thunder without flinching, without waiting for the voice underneath it. He moved to Seattle, to a city where the sky was always gray, always low, always safely hidden behind layers of clouds that never organized into anything dangerous. He took a job indoors in an office with no windows where he never had to see the horizon. It helped. Most days, but on the days when it didn't help, on the days when the pressure dropped and the wind picked up and something in the air smelled like ozone and possibility, Ryan found himself drawing. Just sketches at first. Idle shapes on notepads during meetings, doodles in the margins of documents. Wings, bodies, eyes. He told himself it didn't mean anything. He told himself he'd forgotten what Ethan had shown him, what the storm had whispered, what he'd seen in that moment when the tornado touched down and the sky opened like an eye. But some nights, when the thunder rolled in from the Pacific and the lightning flickered behind the clouds, Ryan stood at his window and watched for movement, watched for shapes, watched for the door to open again. And sometimes, in the flash of lightning, he thought he saw something watching back, something with wings, something waiting. The storms would come again, they always did. And when they came, Ryan knew, with a certainty that went deeper than thought, deeper than fear, deeper than anything he could put into words, that they would remember him. The sky never forgets, and neither do the things that live in it.